Well, welcome again. It's nice to have you here this morning. I get the privilege of following up with I. Last week we saw the disastrous results of what happened when Achan chose to steal from Yahweh, and what happened to the Israelite army when they tried to attack this small fortress, 3 acres in size, as we talked about, and lost 36 men. Now we get to go back to I. But before we get into that, one of the things I want to talk about is I love to study etymology. Like the origin of words and phrases is fascinating to me. I think sometimes it helps us to understand when we get to the initial usage why they are what they are. So I was thinking about that. Take the exclamation point in English. Have you ever wondered where that came from? I mean, inquiring minds want to know, right? Like, in Latin, the Latin phrase io, I-O, was an exclamation of joy. And eventually the I and the O got placed on top of each other. The O became a dot and the I became what we know as the exclamation point with a dot underneath. It comes from Latin. Or the question mark. Like, have you ever wondered where'd that come from? In Latin, if there was a question at the end of the sentence, the old Latin scholars would write the word quaestio at the end. Later on, that was reduced to quo. And the problem was the scholars, like, somebody's going to misunderstand this and think that this is an ending to a word. So they squashed the Q on top and the O at the bottom, which later became a squiggle and a dot, question mark. So like there's a reason why we look at these things, because it's cool to see the etymology. It's quaestio. We have a question. But what about our word faith? I've told you before in some of the sermons that I've preached that we've misunderstood that in our modern concept of how we take the word faith and we apply it like it's the word hope. Like, I have faith I'm going to get home today. Well, that's really hope. That's not faith, as we understand it. When we look at the etymology of the word in the New Testament, and it's really going to play in our text today, when we look at the etymology of that word in the New Testament, the word is pistis, which is a word that literally means faith. But the idea behind that was that it was a faithful relationship of partners in an agreement and the trustworthiness of the partners. Almost like a covenant. So when I exercise faith, I am in a trustworthy relationship with God, and I have things that I have to do, and God has things he chooses to do. I say that purposefully. But that is faith. It is, in a sense, a covenant agreement. So keep that in mind as we go through the passage. We're looking at Joshua chapter 8. We're going to look at verses 1 through 35, and I've entitled it, Return to I. Because now we know what happened. Achan is now under a pile of rocks, along with his family and donkeys and everything else. A new monument for Israel. As you're walking your dog, as we talked about in the wilderness, and you come across this pile of rocks, and your child said, "What do these rocks mean?" Let me tell you, this is the dude who stole from Yahweh. And this is what happened to him. No different than the pile of rocks by the Jordan and in the Jordan that reminds Israel of God's mighty works. So in chapter 8, verse 1, we now come to the sin has been removed, the pollution has been removed from the community, and God now comes to Joshua. Now the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not fear or be dismayed." Those words are used throughout the Old Testament. To fear about 40 times, but to dismayed only occurs 3 times. But they occur at significant points. One is when they're getting ready to defeat Og in the book of Numbers, who was his bed, and we'll talk about this later, his bed was 13 feet tall. Like, Og was a big dude. And so, like, I would think if you're going to go up against a 13-foot dude, you probably want to say, "Hey, don't fear. I've got this." That was Yahweh's words to Moses. And again in Deuteronomy 21, don't fear, looking at when they're going to do the conquest of Canaan. These words, I think, were humanly necessary. They just had this tragic defeat at Ai. And doesn't it make sense that God's going to tell Joshua and the army, hey, look, don't fear. I've got this. Sin has been removed. And now he's going to change the plan a bit. Remember the plan last week? The spies went up and like, it's a little fortress city, not a big deal, 3 acres. Send 2,000 to 3,000 men. We've got this. Didn't go well. They didn't know about Achan. What God says to Joshua, I want you to take all the men of war up there. All the men of war with you, arise and go up to Ai. Yahweh's plans differ than the spies. In chapter 7, he calls for all the people. And in a realistic sense, that's necessary. Remember what the army felt after the defeat at Ai? Their hearts had melted. Like they had lost their courage, lost their motivation to fight. All the men of Israel needed to be up there for this victory, for them to reestablish that relationship with Yahweh one, but also the courage to continue on. They've got a lot of battles to fight yet. And we've only looked at 2 battles at this point, and there's a lot of them. Joshua just, oh yeah, we did that and we did that, like super quick. These are long, detailed descriptions of the battles that Israel fought, possibly to encourage the whole army after the first defeat at Ai. And then Yahweh's going to tell Joshua exactly what he told him about Jericho. I've already given this city into your hands. I have given into your hand the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. And as I mentioned, Hebrew is very simple. It only has a couple different tenses, but this one is the perfect tense. In Yahweh's mind, the battle has already been fought and won by Israel. And as I mentioned before, only a living, active God can tell you what's going to happen into the future for real, because he's directing the battle. So I've already given you not only Ai, but the king, the land, the whole area. And we'll see that another city gets involved in this. And he's going to say 3 things, part of his battle plan. You're going to do to Ai and his king just like you did to Jericho. We already know what that looks like. Burning, killing, all of that. Number 2, he's going to change a little bit from Jericho. He's going to say, you shall take only its spoil and cattle as plunder for yourselves. You remember, like in Jericho, they could touch nothing. That was Achan's issue. And we'll look at that a little bit different because he's going to repeat it again. But at this point, 1, to remove temptation, because now you can take what you need from this city. But God's like, hey, any of the plunder is yours. And number 3, part of Yahweh's plan, which is very distinct, is I'm going to have you set an ambush behind the city. So he's like, I want you to set an ambush in the city behind it. And this was not unknown. We know from Assyrian and Egyptian sources, this was something that they used in battle. But what Yahweh is going to say is, I want you to take a contingent of men, put them behind the city of Ai. That's the ambush group. And then we'll see how the battle plays out as we get into the narrative. So the second section that we look at is Joshua's now going to give instructions to his troops. But he's really going to focus first on the 30,000. That's going to be the ambush group. So Joshua rose with all the people of war to go to Ai. Now, as I've mentioned before, and this is a bit redundant, the chronology of this passage is disturbing to us because this is not how we would write this battle plan. Joshua is going to do this and he's going to do it, and it's like he's going to do it again, but no, he's just telling us that he did what he already did. That's good historical narrative of the Old Testament. Repetition is important. And so when you see the repetition in this passage, that's the emphasis of the passage. So Joshua is like, I rose with all the people of the war to go up to Ai. It is a summary statement. Now he's going to play it out a little bit. And Joshua chose 30,000 men, valiant warriors, and sent them out at night. Now this was unique. The ambush plan's not unique in ancient Near Eastern warfare, but night warfare is very unique. And you have to remember, you can't think about where we live with light pollution. There was no street lights. There were no like city lights. This was dark as dark. And he's like, at night, I'm going to send these 30,000 men to sneak around and get behind the city of Ai. And he commanded them, that is the 30,000, see, you are going to ambush the city from behind it. 30,000 valiant warriors will be the ambush group that will set up behind the city of Ai. There's going to be a discrepancy in our text. I will deal with that in chapter 12, and I will tell you what I used to tell my students in seminary. I'll tell you. So he says, I'm going to set it up, 30,000 men, don't go far from the city, but be ready. Remember, this whole section is just to the 30,000. Then I and all of the people who are with me will approach the city. So the plan is ambush group behind the city. The rest of the army is going to come up that same road they did before and approach the city of Ai. Using the previous fight and the presumed arrogance of the soldiers of Ai, Joshua and the remaining force will approach, and the soldiers of Ai will presume that this battle will be just like the last. They have no idea of that 30,000 men sitting behind the city. And it will come about that they will come out and meet us as at first, that is the first battle, and we will flee from before them. Using this deception, the army of Israel will again flee as the army rush out of the city gate. The way this is written, it is assumed that Ai had one city gate because the men are behind the city. There's no city gate. City gate was the most vulnerable, most protected part of the city. You remember the city of Makatir had 13-foot walls. So the gate is important. And so they're going to approach from the gate, the heavily guarded gate at Ai. And what the plan is, they're going to approach. The men of Ai are going to come out and they're going to run like before. But it's all a ruse. And they will come out after us, verse 6, until we have drawn them away from the city. So Joshua is still speaking to the 30,000 throughout this part of the narrative. He informs the 30,000 of the battle plan that the rest of the army is going to fight. But how does Joshua know they're going to flee? I mean, Yahweh could have told him that, presumably. Or he might think that I, seeing them coming up, are just going to think like they did before. Hey, look, we routed them once. We can rout them again. But it's interesting, when Joshua uses that verb to draw away, he's like, they will come out until we have drawn them away from the city. The verb is only used in the same style one other time, and it's used in the book of Jeremiah where they're going to be drawn out for sheep to be slaughtered. Another time it's used in a different type of the verb is in Joshua 20, where Israel is now in civil war, and they are going to draw the Benjaminites out of the city to slaughter. That's the idea. We're going to draw them out of the city. Ambush group is behind. For they will say, that is the men of Ai, still in verse 6, they're fleeing for us as at first. Like they're doing this. So Joshua is coming up, men of Ai see it, they run, and the people of Ai will say, look, they're doing exactly what they did last time, let's go. So I want you to keep this map in mind, because you can see the hill between Makatir is the Ai that I believe is Ai, and the ambush group is going to be set up between Makatir and Bethel. So you can see there is a ridge between them that they can hide around. And so I wanted to keep this in mind while we're going through the battle plans. For we will flee before them, and we will flee occurs 3 times in this section. So this is emphatic, like this is part of the battle plan. Ambush group, we're going to run from the men of Ai. Verse 7, still talking to the 30,000, and you shall rise up from your ambush and take possession of the city. Once the fighting men are drawn away from the city, the 30,000 will then enter the city through the open gate, because you would keep the gate open, right? The men of Ai have nowhere to go. The gate would remain open, so if the battle goes poorly, they can run back in and not wait for the gate to be opened. So in case the battle turns, The gate now is open. The men are going to run out, and now we have an open city for the ambush group. For the Lord your God will deliver it into your hand. Speaking to the 30,000. Verse 8, then it will be when you have seized the city that you will set the city on fire. Like Jericho, Ai is to be burned. As mentioned last week, the archaeological work done at Maktir shows a burn level at exactly the time of Joshua. Like it fits the archaeology of this section. And you shall do it according to the word of the Lord. In other words, the burning of the city and all that's going to be done is coming from Yahweh. And then Joshua says, see, I have commanded you. So Joshua is speaking the very words of Yahweh, like a prophet, to the people. Yahweh spoke, this is what you're going to do, and I now command you, this is what you're going to do. So Joshua was the very spokesman for Yahweh in this setting to the 30,000. Verse 9, so Joshua sent them away and they went to the place of ambush. The 30,000 are sent to their ambush spot, and they do so at night. There's a lot of chronological issues. I already told you that, as well as repetition in this text, which drives us as Westerners crazy. But this is great ancient Near Eastern literature, great narrative. Always look for repetition for the main points, which we have here. And they remain between Bethel and Ai. You can see that on the map. That is the 30,000 on the west side of Ai. But Joshua spent the night among the people. So Joshua was with the larger contingent of the army because he is the one that's going to be coming up into the battle plan. So section 3 in your outline in the update, the men of Ai pursuing Israel. This is battle plan 1. Verse 10, a lot of repetition. Now Joshua rose early in the morning and mustered the people. So after instructing the 30,000, the battle plan is now outlined. This section will now narrate in broader detail what he told the 30,000 in verses 3 through 9. And he went up with the elders of Israel before the people of Ai. So there are going to be 3 different groups. There's the ambush group, which we know about. The elders in Joshua. Remember, these are the same people that bowed before the ark after the defeat at Ai the first time. They're going to be a part of this. And then the men of war who were with him went up and drew near and arrived in the front of the city. So again, 3 groups of people. The 30,000 that are behind between Ai and Bethel on the other side of the ridge. There are the Joshua and the elders coming up, and the whole army of Israel coming up that same road through the same wadi. Remember, this is a 20-mile, 4,000-foot climb from Gilgal to here. This is not an easy march. But they come up, and what they're going to do is they're going to approach Ai directly in front of the gate. And they camped on the north side of Ai. Now, there was a valley between him and Ai, and you can see that on the map. There is a small valley between the two. The geography notations show that the writer had very intimate knowledge of this area. And again, my understanding is that Joshua wrote this. It may have been updated by later writers, later editors of the text, but Joshua clearly wrote these narratives. Again, strategic, as this valley gives him some hard ground to cover in case there's a surprise attack. But now the army is on the north side of Ai. The ambush group is on the west side of Ai. And he took about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai. If that doesn't raise questions to you, you didn't hear the first part where it was 30,000 men. So I read, I studied, I did all the research I could possibly do. And the beauty is no one else knows what this means either. So I'm good. Like, I'm in good company when I say, I don't know how to make sense of this. There are a couple suggestions. I'm not going to go into those. Had to do with a way to read the word thousand in some of the other languages. I have a unique understanding, but it's probably like if I were to put it out there, people would be like, well, maybe. But like one of the things that we know is, remember, the ambush group is between Ai and Bethel. Bethel is going to enter into the battle. And it may be that Joshua, understanding this and knowing that somehow this ambush group triggered the people of Bethel, that maybe he said, maybe we should send another 5,000 people out. Maybe. That would be one possible suggestion. But like I said, and I used to tell students in the seminary back in the day, get used to these three words and feel very comfortable to use those. I don't know. Because we don't have enough data. If Joshua was here, like I could say, hey, dude, like 30,000, 5,000, something's not right. But Joshua was not here, and we're reading a text that was written 3,500 years ago and trying to understand it. All I can say is 30,005, the text is still good. Like, I believe that, and we can understand that to be true. But he took about 5,000 men and put them in that ambush place between Bethel and Ai on the west side of the city. Verse 13. So they, that is Joshua and the elders, stationed the people. All the army was on the north side of the city. And its rear guard is on the west side of the city. So you've got the main contingent, you've got the ambush group, and Joshua spent the night in the midst of the valley. Interesting, it's a different word for valley here. And I believe that maybe Joshua spent this by himself, away from the rest of the army. My guess, in prayer and preparation for the battle that's going to take place. But it's a different word for valley than what was used of where the army is going to be, in the valley between Ai and where the army is set up. Verse 14. And it came about when the king of Ai saw it, that is, saw the army of Israel across the valley from the gate of Ai, that the men of the city hurried, rose up, got up early in the morning, just like Joshua does, and went out to meet Israel in battle. Exactly what Joshua had planned and Yahweh had planned. So they see the men on the north side of the city, facing the gate of the city. The king sees them and is like, guys, let's do it. Like they're going to run like before. So they get up early in the morning, that is anticipation, and they're going to go and they're going to attack the people of Israel. That the men of the city hurried, rose up, and went out to meet Israel in battle. He and all of his people at the appointed place before the desert plain. And you're like, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, battles in the ancient Near East were fought mainly on the level ground. They were battles of attrition, if you understand that. A battle of attrition means that if you have an army coming against you that has 3,000 men, you want 3,001 men, because you want to have at least one guy standing at the end if things go poorly. That's a battle of attrition. They were mainly fought on flat ground, man against man, right? Sword against sword, javelin against javelin. That's how they fought. So they go out to meet them on that plain. And Joshua, verse 15, and all Israel pretended to be beaten by them and flee by the way of the wilderness. So Joshua comes up, the men of Ai come out, Joshua and the men run like they did before. And it says they went towards the Arabah, which is just the Jordan Valley where the river is, but they're running away from the people of Ai just like they did before. And all the people who were in the city were called together to pursue them. Verse 16. All here probably refers to all the men of war, because we know that the ambush group is going to go in and do some of the mop-up work. There must be people in the city, and they pursued, notice the repetition of pursue, and they pursued Joshua and were drawn away from the city. So they come up, Joshua and the army runs, people of Ai run out, chasing the Israelite army. So a man was not left in Ai, and here's where it comes in, and Bethel. So the city that's across the ridge there. A man was not left in Ai or Bethel who would not come out of Israel, after Israel. Bethel enters the battle. The closeness of the city and the fact that the ambush group had been set between Ai and Bethel likely caused Bethel to enter the fight. Nowhere in Joshua is it recorded that Joshua defeated the city of Bethel, but it does say in chapter 12 that he hung the king of Bethel. So Bethel at some point was defeated, and it may have been that his army was defeated right now in this setting. And the men who had gone out of Ai, the last part of 17, they left the city unguarded. And again, he says they pursued Israel. So again, notice that repetition, to pursue, to pursue, pursue. Exactly what Yahweh had planned, what Joshua had instructed. So in section 4 of your outline, the ambush group taking Ai, then the Lord said to Joshua, here now Yahweh is the commander again, directing the battle, stretch out the javelin that is in your hand towards Ai. The word for javelin there is not the normal word for a sword or a spear. It is the word kadan, and it's suggested that it may be reflective of what we know from Egyptian sources and Mesopotamian sources of kind of a crescent-shaped sword, because that picture was a sign of divine sovereignty. And so here Yahweh is directing Joshua to pull out that javelin and hold it towards the city of Ai, which was the signal for the 30,000, maybe 35,000 people to come in. For I will give it into your hand. This is very similar, the stretching out of the javelin. Remember when Moses was fighting Amalek in the wilderness in the book of Numbers, he had to hold up his staff and his arms were getting tired, and so he had two people continue to hold up the staff until the battle was complete. Joshua was going to do the same thing with this kadan, this javelin that he's going to hold out, which is a signal for the ambush group. So Joshua stretched out the javelin that was in his hand towards the city. Notice 3 times the word hand, which is good Egyptian. You're like, well, this is Hebrew. I get that, but they came from Egypt. The hand of the Pharaoh was all powerful. That's why we have things like the hand of Yahweh or the finger of God. It's a picture of that, the true supreme power behind what Joshua was doing. Joshua's hand was an instrument in Yahweh's work. That javelin, if indeed that kadan was a sign of divine power, it was because Joshua was wielding it for Yahweh. Joshua, and notice, he commands Joshua to do it, and Joshua does it. Obedience to the command of God. Obedience and blessing throughout the text goes hand in hand. Joshua's hand is the very power of Yahweh. Verse 19, at that signal, the men in ambush rose quickly from their place, and when he stretched out his hand, they ran and entered the city and captured it. And this is a more modern depiction. Those cities, of course, those are kind of modern buildings. They didn't really exist in Joshua's day. But you can see the ridge between the two. That's where the men were hiding. They came through the cut and came right to the city of Ai. So when he stretched out his hand, they ran and entered the city and quickly set it on fire. Verse 20, and when the men of Ai turned back and looked, behold, the smoke of the city ascended to the sky. And there's almost like a picture of a sacrifice, like the sweet smell of the sacrifice that would ascend to Yahweh. The smoke of the city of Ai ascended up. The term is purposeful there. And they had no place to flee this way or that, for the people who had been fleeing to the wilderness turned against the pursuers. So the picture is Joshua takes out his kadan, the ambush group enters Ai, sets Ai on fire, and now the men of Ai turn back and they're like, wait a second, we got to go back. Now the men of Israel turn on the attackers and Ai's stuck in the middle between the two. For the people who had been fleeing to the wilderness, that is the army of Israel, turned against the pursuer. When Joshua and all Israel saw that the men in ambush had captured the city and that the smoke of the city ascended, they turned back and slew the men of Ai. So again, stuck between the two. And the others, verse 22, that is the ambush group, came out from the city and encountered them. So now they were trapped in the midst of Israel, some on this side and some on that. And literally in the Hebrew, it says this from that, these from this, these from this, twice. It's to give you an impression of the confusion of the men of Ai. They had nowhere to go. The city is burning. It's already been taken. Army on this side, army on this side, and they are doing what they can to survive. And they, the army of Israel, both groups, slew them until no one was left who had survived or escaped. The army of Israel, comes together, kills the army of Ai and Bethel. Verse 23, but they took alive the king of Ai and brought him to Joshua. A sign of ultimate victory is the taking of the king and the killing. The city did not fall until the king fell. So the aftermath of battle, verse 24 through 29. Now it came about when Israel had finished killing all the inhabitants of Ai in the field in the wilderness where they had pursued them, notice again the repetition, that all of them were fallen by the edge of the sword until they were destroyed, kind of emphatic, they're all gone. Then all Israel returned to Ai and struck it with the edge of the sword. Anyone who was left in the fortress city were then taken out by the army of Israel. And all who fell that day, both men and women, were 12,000. Another reference to the total destruction of the armies. Although Bethel is not mentioned in this verse, we know they were part of Ai's fighting force, which may account for the larger number in a 3-acre city, because you wouldn't have 12,000 soldiers in a 3-acre city. And the Bethel, we know, as I mentioned before, that the king of Bethel was killed by Joshua. He's listed in of the kings that were killed. And why did that happen? Verse 26, for Joshua did not withdraw his hand with which he stretched out his javelin. Like Moses in the wilderness, holding up the rod, Joshua with his kadan holding out the javelin, he kept it there until the victory was complete. Yahweh's promise and power works in concert with Joshua's leadership until he had utterly destroyed, that is, Haram, utterly destroyed the inhabitants of Ai. Verse 27, Israel took only the cattle and the spoil of that city as plunder for themselves. And you're like, well, that seems if Achan could have just waited a little bit, he probably could have got something, right? But he didn't. Remember, everything that was in Jericho was for Yahweh, all of it. Here, Yahweh says, look, which is totally normal ancient Near Eastern warfare, you can take the booty of the city. And as I mentioned, part of that may be to reduce temptation. But the other thing, you got to remember, Israel is now in a land without manna. God's not feeding them anymore. And they need provisions. They need food. They need other things as they begin to inhabit this land. So it makes sense that they would take these things for themselves. And they burned the city. But people was like, well, why would they do that? I mean, they have to live here. Israel only burned 3 cities in all of the conquest. We see 2 of them already, Jericho and Ai. The third one, Hatzor, is going to be burned later. All the rest are left standing. Israel's got to have a place to live when they come into the land. And so when they take some of these other cities, they live within the confines of cities which other people built. So they took only the cattle and the spoil of the cities for themselves, according to the word of the Lord, which he had commanded them. The narrator wants you to know this isn't like Achan's thing. God said it was okay for them to do that. So Joshua burned Ai and made it a heap forever. As part of Haram, Ai is burned and destroyed. Only 3 cities that I mentioned are burned. This is one of 3. But it's a monument to Yahweh's work, right? We have the monument of Achan. We have the monument of Jericho. We have the monument of the Jordan River. Now we have the monument of obedience and God's blessing at the city of Ai. From a strategic standpoint, standpoint, Joshua removed a fortress city, a key outpost on the roads to the interior of Canaan. It's interesting. It says that Joshua burned Ai and made it a heap. Remember what Ai means? The heap of stones. He uses a different word here, but Ai becomes, the heap of stones becomes a tell, a heap. So it's a bit of a play on words here. And a desolation to this day. That's true in Joshua's day, the later editor's day, and frankly, January 18th, 2026, it's still a heap of stones. That's what it looks like. That first picture that I showed you with the title page, that's Ai. That's Makatir. Verse 29, and he hanged the king of Ai on a tree until evening. Understand, if in your mind you're thinking Clint Eastwood, the good, bad, and the ugly, that's not what hanging was in the ancient Near East. I won't go into detail. It's not a pretty picture. But he was displayed, we'll put it that way, for all the people to see that he was truly dead. That's the point. And he hanged the king of Ai on a tree until evening. This comes from Deuteronomy 21. That's what you would do for someone who was cursed, especially when it was a criminal offense. They were to hang, but you were to remove their bodies before dark. And that's exactly what Joshua does, again, in obedience. A sign of the curse of God, Deuteronomy 21, 22 through 23. And as sunset, Joshua gave the command. He took the body down and threw it at the entrance of the gate and raised over it another heap of stones that stands to this day. Now, the text is going to do an incredible shift here. We're moving north, and there's no indication of why. And again, from a chronological standpoint, this next event that we're going to look at briefly occurs somewhere in the history of the conquest of Canaan. We just don't know where. We know that the covenant renewal, which is what this is going to do, we're going to look at a covenant renewal ceremony that was commanded by Yahweh through Moses back in Deuteronomy, that every 7 years, the Mosaic covenant had to be renewed, which may give a hint of accountability, when a child is accountable, maybe. But whatever the case, every 7 years, they had to renew the covenant. We're going to see it twice in Joshua, one here and once in Joshua 24. But in a covenant renewal that you would go through, and we'll see how God, this was exactly how Moses had dictated it. He's going to play it out here. Verse 30. So they move, you can see where Ai and Bethel are. They move north to Shechem. So the valley in between these two mountains, this is Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. And the valley in between is the city of Shechem, modern city. Again, didn't look like that in Joshua's day. Then Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel. After building a pile of stones over Ai and its king, now Joshua builds another heap of stones on Mount Ebal. And remember, it was by law, the altars in Israel had to be uncut stone. You did not fashion it. And people will say, well, why would that be? Because some of the altars in the ancient Near East were fashioned with the face of the gods. This had to be uncut stone. At this point, Canaan is secure enough that Joshua can move all of Israel from Gilgal to Shechem and the two mountains flanking the valley below. Shechem is an important site, as both Abraham and Jacob built altars there, and Jacob actually purchased property here in the book of Genesis. This is a sacred site for the people of Israel, the city of Shechem. And the two mountains, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, form a natural amphitheater. So it's a perfect place for what we're going to see in this narrative. And there's a question of whether Shechem is already in Israel's hands. How does Joshua feel comfortable enough to move everybody up here, still in tents, at the city of Shechem? There are some historical potentialities, I won't go into them, of some tablets that were written from the kings of Canaan to Egypt about the same period of time, but all we know is Joshua felt comfortable enough to do this. The chronology of this event makes it sound like it happened right after Ai, but we have no idea when this occurs. It could have been a year or two later. It could have been soon after. We don't know, because chronology wasn't important. The important thing is, after this great victory of Yahweh saying, this is what I will do, the obedience of the people, and Yahweh following through, now they're going to do a covenant renewal. And it's on Mount Ebal. This is a picture of the top of Mount Ebal. That is an altar that was built probably in the time of Deborah, so after the time of Joshua. But they've done some archaeological work at this site, and in the middle of that structure, they found a round altar that dates to the time of Joshua. It may actually be Joshua's altar on the top of Mount Ebal. Again, we don't need verification. The scripture is true, but I love the fact that archaeology confirms what we're talking about as well. As I mentioned, Ebal and Gerizim form a natural amphitheater, and the ceremony is a covenant renewal commanded by Moses in Joshua 27. Ebal is about 3,000 feet high, had an incredible view of Canaan from up there. And he said he did this, built an altar just like Moses had commanded, like I mentioned in Deuteronomy 27, an altar of uncut stones on which no man had yielded an iron tool. And they offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord and sacrificed peace offerings, two types of offerings. The burnt offering was a sin offering. And so you would take the animal, you would cut his throat, you would take the blood, but the whole animal was consumed to Yahweh. In a peace offering or a fellowship offering, you were actually having a meal with Yahweh. It was a renewal of a relationship with Yahweh. You would take the animal, part of it would be burnt up to God, part of it you would consume, and the picture was you were having a meal with God. So a meal and a sacrifice. That's what they did at Mount Ebal. Keep that in your mind. And he wrote there on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which had been written in the presence of the sons of Israel. So what he wrote, it may have been the blessings and the curses, it may have been the 10 Commandments, it may have been part of the law, whatever it was clear that this was the covenant agreement, the Susan-Trevassel treaty that was made with Israel at Mount Sinai by Yahweh himself. And notice, when they do this in this covenant renewal, that the stranger as well as the native, when you entered into Israel, you entered into this covenant relationship. So I can picture with Israel there doing this ceremony, Rahab and her family are there, now accepting the dictates of the covenant, the stipulations of the covenant, and the blessings of the covenant. Half of them stood, verse 33, on Mount Gerizim, Mount Ebal. In Genesis, in the book of Deuteronomy, they're divided by tribes. But now you have all Israel in this natural amphitheater, and Joshua renewing the covenant with them with a meal, and a sacrifice. And now he's going to read the whole book of Deuteronomy. You imagine, like, if I got up this morning and said, hey, like, we're just going to do the Deuteronomy. You're going to stand here while I read the book of Deuteronomy. It would be very cool, because the book of Deuteronomy is great. But the whole book of Deuteronomy is the covenant agreement. It is the actual written covenant agreement made at Mount Sinai, and it follows exactly the way it should be written from the ancient Near Eastern sources. So he reads the whole book of Deuteronomy while the people hear the blessings of God, the history of what God has done, and especially the blessings and the curses. Blessings for obedience, curses for disobedience. It is this covenant that the prophets are going to bring into Israel over and over and over again in their failure to keep the covenant, and it's why Israel will eventually go to Assyria and Babylon. Because the ultimate curse of the covenant, you will go to a land of a people you don't know, and you won't be able to speak their language. And they do. That was the curses of the covenant. The blessings was it was going to rain when it was supposed to rain. God says, I'm going to open the storehouses of heaven. It's going to rain. You're going to have food like you've never had food before, if you're obedient. Then afterward, he read all the works of the law, the blessings and the curse, according to all that was written in the book of law. Not a word of all that Moses had commanded, which Joshua did not read before the assembly. And then he adds, so that you understand, this wasn't just for the army. With the women, and the little one and the strangers. Everyone is held accountable to the law of God, to the agreement of God. So what? I really want to focus not on the successful battle of I. God spoke, he said he would do it, and he does. And Joshua was obedient. So there's a connection between obedience and success. But several years ago, I spent some time trying to understand the nature of what we call the Lord's table. And I really would have loved to have done it today, but we have other things going on. But really the significance of the Lord's table, like what does that mean for us? In Acts 2:42, it records 4 actions of the early church. One of them was breaking bread. They went around breaking the bread. And verse 46 in Acts 2 kind of fleshes it out for us. They broke bread from house to house, taking meals together with gladness and sincerity of heart. From Scripture and from the writings of the early church, the breaking of bread was twofold. There was the agape feast. They would meet and have a meal together, and then they would do the Lord's table. So think of it, what we call communion, a meal and a sacrifice. So there is a covenant connection to what we do every other Sunday here at Fellowship Bible Church, as I understand it. And a significant part of Old Testament theology is the covenants. We've talked about the Mosaic covenant. There was also the Abrahamic covenant, which was a non-conditional, unconditional covenant that was to Israel and to us. We are a part of that. That was unconditional. God was going to give them the land. He was going to give them Messiah, and he was going to give them a blessing regardless of the obedience. That was going to take place. And the Mosaic covenant became, or the Abrahamic covenant became the Davidic covenant, which is the new covenant. Same thing, same beast. We are now participating in that new covenant because, as it was said to Abraham, in you, Abraham, all the nations of the world will be blessed. We are the nations that are being blessed because of the covenant made to Abraham. But at the covenant ceremony, 2 sacrifices were offered. One centered around the sin offering, the other was the fellowship offering, just like they did here. A sacrifice and a meal with Yahweh. And when we talk about covenants and it's centered around love, love is not the fickle emotion that we think of it. Love was loyalty. Like if I loved in the Vassal Treatise of Esarhaddon, which I'm sure you've read in your spare time, to love Esarhaddon was to obey Esarhaddon. To love God is to obey God. It's loyalty to what we've agreed to. Remember the faith thing at the beginning? The trustworthiness between 2 people, me and God. I have to be trustworthy. God is trustworthy. In Exodus 24, when on Mount Sinai, when Moses is offering the covenant for the people of Israel, they have a meal together on Mount Sinai. And he takes some of the blood of the sacrifice and sprinkles the blood. And he said, this is the covenant in my blood, or this, behold the blood of the covenant. In Mark, when Christ institutes the Last Supper, he uses that phrase. He just puts my in it. Behold, my blood of the covenant. So at the Last Supper, this is the blood of my covenant. The parallel with Exodus 24 is without mistake. The ancient church with the table and the meal were ratifying an oath of loyalty to God, ratified and made possible by the blood of Christ on the cross, the ultimate blood of the covenant, the seed promised. You're like, well, we're supposed to, I thought we're just going to remember. Remember, the word remember doesn't mean to recall to mind, because that would be silly. Like, in the book of Genesis, when God remembered Noah, and so it'd be like God was like, oh yeah, I got that guy in the ark. I totally forgot about him. That's not remembered. When he remembered Noah, he did something in light of that remembrance. So when we remember the covenant, we're doing something in light of that promise. In AD 112, Pliny the Younger, writing to the Roman Emperor Trajan, reports the results of an interrogation of a captured Christian. He recounts that Christians gathered se sacramento abstringere. Latin. Hear the word sacrament, right? We don't use that term anymore because of the break off of Protestants. But in the early church, the sacrament, they called that because the sacrament, the sacramentum was the oath of loyalty that a soldier would take to the emperor. And so when the Christians gathered, se sacramentum obstringere, they gathered to swear themselves to an oath, not to the emperor, but to whom? To Yahweh, to God. And so it is when we take the Lord's cup and we take the bread, we are in a sense taking on, we are renewing the oath that we made, the trustworthiness that I have on my part. And Christ gave it very clear to us. What is my oath? To love God with all my heart, all my soul, and all my mind. And what? To love my neighbor as myself. That's my oath. And so when I'm taking the communion on Sunday mornings, I am ratifying we don't do the meal anymore, but we're remembering the sacrifice because it's part of that covenant oath that we take, that my loyalty is to Christ, to God, first and foremost. Love him with all my heart, all my soul. Everything that I do is about loving God. And out of that, loving my neighbor. And if you take the 10 commandments, that's exactly what they are, just ratified in 2 different phrases instead of 10. So remember pistis, faith. A faithful relationship of partners in an agreement and the trustworthiness of their partners. I'm covenant renewal. When I take it in my mind, I am remembering Christ, but I'm remembering the oath that I swore when I came to faith in Christ. I'm going to put Christ, Yahweh, first in all that I do. Do I always do that? No, and neither do you. So don't look at me like that. We don't. But that is our focus. That is our goal. Because one day I'm going to see Christ face to face and I will be as I am supposed to be. But right now is a battle to get to where I'm supposed to be, just like it is for you. But what a great opportunity every time that we take the bread and we drink the cup, that we're reminded that, yes, God, I am swearing an oath to you that I'm going to put you first in all that I do, and I'm going to love my neighbor as myself. Thank you, Father. You are a great God, and I just pray that you will be with each one of us as we kind of think through all that was said today, Lord, the faithfulness that you always have towards what you do in our lives and in others. Even though we don't like it sometimes, you are still always faithful, Lord, and I pray that we will rest on that. I also pray that we will know deep down to put you first in our lives and to live in a way that is pleasing and righteous, Lord, so that we can work to win this world for you. Thank you, Father. Amen.